On the holy mountain, it is a custom for the monks to go to confession every day and to reveal their thoughts to their elder. This is usually monks, the novices. It's not established monks, who've got years of experience, and the young ones, and they go every day. And when I heard of this initially, I thought, well, this is a good thing, but I didn't sort of take much notice. But I didn't realise that the confession of thoughts is not thoughts in the everyday sense of the word, in which we have, I forgot to leave something in the trapezoid, or I did something similar. This is to do with warfare. These are not ordinary thoughts, these are thought forms which have a lot of negative energy. And this is what the monks are confessing, because the moment they become monks, they begin to be attacked by this demonic energy. And so it's important for them to confess to their spiritual father. This is not to do with wrongdoing, all right? This is nothing to do with morals. This is to do with actual warfare, and to say that I am attacked by a particular thought. The Greek word for thought is logismos, as thought is thought in English, but it has in a spiritual sense, it has a much greater meaning. There was a young man visiting the Holy Mountain. He wanted to stay for a while, and they agreed, and he went and lived in a cell in a small skeet, and he was under a Father Christos, who was sort of looking after him. And when it came to go to services, they had to go up to the monastery. I think it was Ivera where we were, Mihai. And walking up to Ivera, he suddenly felt terrible. His head was buzzing physically, it was painful, and lots of millions of ideas and thoughts and everything he could think of was flashing through his mind, and he almost couldn't make it to the church. When he got to the church, there was an old man called Father Sava, and he looked and said, "Oh, I see, yes, they're getting at you, aren't they?" He knew immediately what was wrong with him, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it." He said, "Come on." He took him into the church, went into the choir stalls where the monks are, and he sat him down, and he touched his head like that, and everything went away. This is what he was being. He was not even a monk, but a visitor who obviously was serious. I think he became a monk later, was experiencing what we call logismoi, which is these thoughts. Now we need to understand that as Orthodox Christians, and we're striving for our salvation, we cannot be without these thoughts. It's not possible. As I say, these thoughts are not like regular thoughts. According to a study at the University of Minnesota, we have 4,000 thoughts in a 16-hour day. Don't ask me how they measure that, but anyway, that's something that was quoted. But there's nothing to do with that. And the more I think about it, I realise that I believe, all right, I don't know exactly, but I feel what is happening is that when we sin and we confess, then those sins are forgiven and we have to move on. But the demons know that we've sinned and that we have a weakness, or rather we have weaknesses, we have lots of them. And so they then make up packages, as it were, of thought forms which they can send to us all the time. We are not guilty. We've confessed the sin, we have received absolution, God forgives. We are not guilty. But the idea of the demons is to make us feel guilty. And then the big thing, which is the biggest problem, is that we start wondering, why is this happening to me? This is basic, isn't it? Reaction to something's happening, saying, now why is this, It's wrong. When it's logismoi attacking, you can't do that. Because why means, how can this happen to me because I'm so perfect? It's pride. And this Father Sava was talking to this young man and saying that these attacks are related to you, but you're not guilty of them, all right? It depends what it is, of course. I mean, I'm not going to give you a list of sins. Father Sophronian Ethics also talked about logismoi, and that we cannot fight them. Well, actually, we can fight, but we can't stop. You cannot stop having these thoughts. And as the demons see our weakness, and we all have weaknesses, then they can use these thoughts to attack us. And I've got here, they penetrate into the very depth of our human being. This is not just ordinary thoughts. They're very powerful and can undermine every trace of the spiritual life in its very foundation. And I made a note here, perhaps there's a connection between pathological disassociation and logismoi. Would you say that's possible, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, people going for therapy, patients, are being attacked by logismoi. Christian or not Christian, it doesn't matter, they're being attacked, and then because they don't know how to deal with this logismoi, these thought forms, they begin to take over. We have to understand that these thought forms are entities. In other words, they have energy, they have ontological being. They're not subjective thoughts of the mind. They're nothing to do with subjectivity. They're actual things, entities, which are created by demons. I always think in terms of a package that they've got for us. So they see and say, oh, well, that's your weakness, so they send it. And then they see how we're going to react. Are we going to react by challenging it? Most times that's what happens, actually, but it's still not a sin. It's not a sin, but it's not going to help you deal with it. I think the most important thing to understand is that this is a temptation, that it does not belong to you personally. There are quite numerous cases with priests wanting to serve, and during the serving they have blasphemous thoughts, which they've never had before. So where does that come from? They didn't have one before, but the demons have a way of knowing a weakness that we can't see ourselves. Not that the person is blasphemous, but there's some connection. And also all sorts of peculiar things happen, sort of crazy thoughts, almost humorous, that they come when you're trying to serve the liturgy in particular. They're there all the time, okay? They don't go away. And what you have to do as a priest is ignore them. That's the only way. You can't say, well, why? Well, we know why, because it's spiritual attack. And so that's something that we have to deal with. There was two young monks on the Holy Mountain under their spiritual father, and they lived separately. And then one day the spiritual father went to visit them. He said, I want you to come and live with me for a few days, stay with me for a couple of days, because he wanted to see how they were progressing spiritually. Well, in the evening he went and he saw them. Actually, I think he may have seen them in spirit, I don't know. But anyway, one of the monks, the young monks, was praying, and he could see all these insects flying around him, like mosquitoes, bugs, all sorts of things flying around. And the young monk was swatting them out the way as he was praying. And he realized, this is good, okay, he's dealing with it. How's he dealing with it? With the insects? Is he talking to them? Because that's what we do. The moment we have thoughts, we say, oh yeah, why is this? Analyze that, what's this? No, if they're like insects, you just swat them. Ignore them. And eventually they break away. So that's a little example. So logismoi have an ontological existence. Do you know what that means? It means being. They actually have a being. There's something solid, all right? They're not just a figment of your imagination. So anything ontological means being. So the spiritual, but you see the problem is, logismoi, and I want to use this quote, have ontological existence and are real, not simply exist as subjective states of mind. They have an entity, they're an entity in themselves. And this is very important to understand that. And the spiritual warfare that goes on undetected by most people is carried out by the logismoi that constantly assault our hearts and minds. You see, logismoi, these thoughts were alien to us before the fall, but after the fall, they became the weapons of the fallen angels, of the devils. And so that they use that in order to disturb us and eventually control us. Because if we don't deal with these thoughts, they will take over. And I think this is probably leading to neurosis, which is mild in comparison with psychosis. And so, you know, psychosis is sort of a loss of reality, because their real self is, I would say, if I can use this analogy, is crowded out. So the real person is crowded out by psychotic behavior and thoughts and also hallucinations. It's all a part of it. So it goes from neurosis to psychosis, and from there it becomes physical pathologies. I met a young man who was actually had a physical, what do you call it, tick, a nervous tick from this psychotic. He couldn't keep his head. He kept twitching his head, and he had his neck was a strange shape. It was very peculiar. This was in New Zealand. I mean, I don't know whether he was possessed. I don't know. He could have been actually, but his muscular movements were very peculiar, not normal. And he was in some other world. He thought he was a prophet. Maybe it was in the demon sense. So, logismoi, these are alien to our original condition. Now, when I say original condition, it means who we really are. They're alien to us. They don't belong to us. But people, because they don't know how to handle it, and have bad, you know, thoughts, anxiety, depression, all these things are part of logismoi. I mean, sometimes, obviously, anxiety and depression, it can be physical because you're ill. We're not, you know, dismissing the biological factors, but I mean, I think in most cases it is actually spiritual. So, what the idea is that Satan uses these logismoi to interrupt our journey to heaven, and also to stop us having an experience of God. And this is why people, I think, in that situation also have a lot of doubts. They maintain our separation from God. What's the opposite of logismoi is prayer. That's the opposite. So when we are attacked by these thoughts, we have to say a prayer. And if we're saying a prayer continuously, and I'm not saying that we can do that, but we should be trying, then these thoughts cannot even get into us. They can't enter us because we have created a resistance. I think it's like Star Trek. You know, when you're attacked by the Klingons, what do you do? Do you know what you do?
Kryptonite?
No, what do you do if you're attacked? All right, Roman, it doesn't matter. What do you do?
Shield up.
Shields up, put the shields up, yes. That's it. So spiritually, and the shields that we put up is prayer. And not entertaining them. Because that's the biggest temptation, I think. All of us were weak. We think, well, yeah, what's this about? Don't. You know the thing I was told you before about interrogation. If you're caught by the enemy, you give your number, rank, and name, no more. If you give them any more than that, they've got you. Believe you me, they can get you to say anything once you start talking. But if you just keep, you know, just giving that set answer, you know, unless they torture you, and then of course you give up everything, but that's a different situation. So the opposite of logismoi is ceaseless prayer, conversation with God. Okay, now I want to get a little bit technical here, because the fathers talk about 5 stages of these attacks. There's 5 stages. There's the initial assault, and he gives it, one of the fathers gives an example like, you see some money lying around and there's nobody around, you think, well, I could take that, and there's nobody there, and you know, this is temptation, all right? But you don't do it, but you know, the opportunity is there. And you should not, but because you see it, you should not feel guilty. But even if you thought about taking it, you must not feel guilty about it. You just say, well, okay. But if you recognize that it's actually a temptation, because that's the important thing, steal that money. We should not feel guilt. And that we should not be surprised that this is a temptation. This is a symptom of the fall. This is not normal. It's abnormal. And when we're attacked, well, I've mentioned this already, but it creates an obsession. And I've got Father Severny called it "why me obsession." You mustn't discuss. You mustn't talk. You know, like when the enemy's attacking the ship, you don't sort of try and, well, you could probably try and negotiate, but the point is you mustn't. But you have to keep the shields up, because the moment you lower them, you only get zapped. You watch Star Trek? No. You're missing out, you are. There is also logismoi, thought forms from God. They're not just evil, but I would say 99% are, but 1% can be good. And when you have a thought that's from God, you have inner peace. No disturbance. When you have logismoi, which is negative, then you feel it. You're anxious. It feels uncomfortable. So from God you get inner peace and joy, and from the devils you get turmoil and unhappiness. The next stage, okay, so assault is the initial attack. The next stage is interaction. You start thinking about it, you start, wanting to analyse what's going on. It's still not a sin. It's not a sin, but it's weakening. Your shields are getting weak. You're down to 80% shield, okay? And this is, in the sense of this example, you would say, should I or should I not take the money? There's nobody around and nobody's going to use it. Why leave it there, So that's interaction. The next three is consent. And that is the beginning of sin, but it ain't sin. Consent. You think, okay, well, I think I'll take it then, yeah? But you haven't actually reached out to get it. I mean, I'm sorry this sounds very technical, and it is technical, but it's straight from the Holy Mountain. An example, actually, that he gives, whoever the monk is writing this, is adultery. Because the demons, he says, well, if that is a temptation, believe you me, they will concoct circumstances so that can be carried out. Okay? And in this regard, St. John Chrysostom, writing in the 4th century about this, he was once visited by zealots. This is, super keen Orthodox. And they were, I don't know how, the discussion was talking about adultery, and one of them said, yes, well, Christ himself said that in the Gospel, in St. Luke's Gospel, if you look at a woman, to want somebody else's wife, all right, well, it doesn't matter. You've committed the sin because it's in your thoughts, it's in your heart. St. John Chrysostom does not agree with that, not with that interpretation, which I find interesting. I still don't know the answer to that, but he said, okay, he said, well, and he was worried about them being zealots. He said, this is it, black is black, white is white, and it isn't always. So he said, okay, well, tomorrow night we're going to have a banquet. Would you like to come to that? Yes, they said. So they prepared a banquet. There was beautiful foods, like here you can see tonight, if you've got the camera there. Right. The most delicious food you could think, wine, whatever you like, And so they stood there. He said, well, let's say a prayer. And so he called his deacon in, and the deacon came in and began to read prayers. And he read, and he read, and he read, and people were salivating and, drooling over all this fantastic food and smells and wonderful, And then he said, oh, yes, and I need to bless the food. Oh, at last, So he blessed the food, and had finished blessing the food. He said, okay, thanks for coming, goodbye. They said, but we hadn't eaten anything. He says, you don't need to, you've already tasted it. That's his condemnation of their being so rigid. How that relates to the gospel in Christ, I don't know. But this is St. John Chrysostom making a point. Okay, so it's hasn't happened, all right? It's consent, but it hasn't happened. But being, well, and this is leading to addiction, actually. Number 4 is captivity, being caught by it, whatever it may be. Addiction it comes to mind immediately. You think, well, I like something and I can't resist, seeing something there. Well, Okay, you know, it's captivity. You're captivated by it. How many people are captivated by alcohol? Captivated. Smoking. If you've ever smoked and tried to stop smoking, it is captivity. It really is trying to get out. It really is. And of course, drugs are far worse. But it can be ambition, captivity to a professional career, which is good in itself. But for you, a particular person, it can be a captivity because they're totally eaten up by it, controlled by it. Verse 4. 5, passion or obsession. So the logismoi become entrenched reality within our minds. And I think that's the type of patience that you have. They're totally absorbed in it, and that's who they are, because it's not who they are. This is the sadness. And Daniel's job is hard, is to make people realize who they are, not what this thing is that's controlling them. It's alcohol or whatever. But it doesn't matter what it is. There's various things, of course. It becomes an obsession and a reality. And this is a negative energy that possesses and controls them. We talk about demon possession, which there is. I haven't seen much of it. I have seen a couple of cases. But this is far worse because this is demon control, influence. And most of us do not realize it, that we're being controlled. But if we begin to understand that the reason that I feel like this is because it's a temptation, which is a real thing being sent, then we can pray and move on. Not going to go away, but we do not have to accept them. And we certainly must not analyze them. It's very important. So how do we defend ourselves and deal with them once they take over? Well, the answer is not easy, actually. It's saying here we have to just shift our focus to something else. Now, we have to understand that we possess angelic energy. The demons have demonic energy, negative energy. We have positive energy through prayer and our icons. You know, if you go to a place, the writer of this book, actually, where I got this particular information, said when he was a young monk in Thessalonica, I had to visit to do something. He said, walking along, and he came to a cross light, and he had to stop, and he suddenly felt this terrible energy, demonic energy, very bad. And then he looked, and then he saw there was a nightclub in the basement, where he had stopped at the lights. And we don't know what goes on there, but he could feel the negative energy. And the opposite is the energy that we feel in church. The Holy Land, visit to the Holy Land, the energy there is incredible. I mean, I'm not saying you feel it all the time, but it's there. It's angelic energy, and so that is an antidote to negative energy. In other words, prayer, and you have an icon, you light your icon lamp. We cannot live without being disturbed. This is a part of being on the road to heaven. But the thing is that we are going home. This is where we belong, is in heaven. We don't belong here. We live here because we have to, but we don't belong. We're not citizens of this world, we're citizens of the next world. And we're trying to get there, but the demons are trying to stop us. That's what it's all about. So if we can have complete indifference to what's happening, and we deal with it with prayer, fasting, charity, and general ascetic life. It's what we do. It's what we do in our parish. With our fasting, can you see the reason for fasting, the value of it? Abstinence, self-control. This is not, we sometimes think of fasting as some sort of punishment, but it isn't. It's God's love helping us to return home, where we belong. And I finish on just a couple of quotes, which comes to my mind, is Dostoevsky said that if you're walking down the street and you see a young child, on the sidewalk, make sure you have a good thought. In other words, don't have a bad thought, because it will influence the child. And I think James Jean, who was an astronomer and philosopher, he said every thought that we have actually affects the universe. So thinking, you can affect a star. Well, I mean, maybe that's just a philosophical statement, but in other words, that these things have energy and power, but so do we. we have it as well. We have angelic power, and that will actually negate this stuff that goes on, but it will not stop it.